Hello, welcome back to the Jackwood Football Podcast. It's January and it's time, well, it's not, it's February, but we're reflecting on January and it's time we talk about everything League One. Tom, how you doing, mate?
Very well, lovely to be back. Thank you to you at home for joining us as well. It's great. It's one of my favourite series that we do together. It's probably the only series we do together, but it's up there with one of the best things you get to do every month. I mean, there's far worse things that happen on a monthly basis, aren't there, Jack?
The first one is, well, it's the traditional. It's Pompey. How have Pompey got on over the course of January? Tom, I'll let you far away. Portsmouth, you are still top of the table. That hasn't changed.
Yes. How are we getting on? Quite well is the answer to that question. To think that he'd sort of rewind to the reads the wind back to the start. That wasn't in the script. That wasn't in the script, but that was good. I enjoyed that. If you do read the wind back to the start of January, you'll end up in a place where Pompey were actually on the end of back-to-back defeats. Of course, the Cheltenham debacle, and then at Leyton Orient, at home to Leyton Orient. We then head out of January into February on a run of 3 wins in 4 since that day. Better still, the second best performing league side in the division of 2024 so far. We will get on to the number 1 side, I'm sure, very shortly. As I said to you over the weekend, mate, our response to when things haven't quite gone our way this season is the quality that I think might just win us promotion. Every single setback, be it Regan Poole, be it Alex Robertson, be it the turning over to Leyton Orient is a great example and supports my point perfectly that is always followed by a run of really strong results and really strong performances. It takes a real steeliness, it takes a strength for that kind of thing to spur you on, get you out of bed in the morning and make you respond better. And that's probably what I'm loving most about Pompey at the minute. It was a really aggressive window. You think about the strength in terms of, and in your most recent video, will it be your most recent video, the one before the roundup from the weekend? One of the most recent videos ranking every team's, and for legal reasons, that was ranking every team's transfer window from whatever it was, rubbish to fantastic. Other means that you went about it, but that kind of thing. We were right up there in terms of your Boltons and even maybe a conversation for Oxford up there as well. So you had Owen Mox onto the mix, Pitt Harris, Matt Macy, Callum Lang, and Pitt Harris as well. You do tend to ally any kind of concern over league position slip up. The word from Andy Cullen heading into this, the word from the recruitment team, everyone surrounding the club was that we would enter January in a slightly weakened position, but we do our absolute best to come out of it in a stronger state of affairs, and that's exactly what we've done. Pledge and promise delivered. Tick in my book there. Twin that commitment with how hot Paddy Lane is running right now, how hot he is as a man in general. I love that bloke. Marlon Pack is in the vein of form of his life. You kind of look at the goal that, well, not only the first goal that those two combined on at the weekend, but the second, or Paddy's second of the afternoon, alongside Callum Lang, going down to 10, thinking, you know what, sod this, we're going to absolutely have it. And red card or not, we're just going to continue playing our unadulterated football. Pitt Harris has taken our final third to a whole new combative level. Callum Lang, I mentioned him there, has the endeavour and the eye for goal, unlike of anyone I've seen for quite some time. 15 games to go now between Pompey and a potential spot in next season's championship. Boy, is it exciting, Wardy.
Yeah, I get the feel now you're really believing, and I think that's really important.
We're kicking on.
Yeah, and I think maybe you've been scarred, haven't you, in recent years? You've been scarred of good starts and then dips and then not failure, sometimes failure, but a lot of frustration.
Failure. Failure's the right word. Most of the time it's been failure.
And this time it's not that. This time it feels as though there's something a little bit different about this Pompey team. And I did a video a few months ago, and I know after that video, the short run of games after that went dreadfully wrong, and I got a little bit of stick for it. But I stand by it. Oh, you don't become a bad team overnight. You had a bad few games. You had a pretty frustrating Christmas period, and we came on here and we discussed it over December and probably was it in November or was it just purely December? I think we probably spoke about it in the last reflection that we did, and you've come through it. And like you say there, we talk about setbacks. You talk about setbacks on the football pitch, off the football pitch. You've managed to sort of prevail in all of those. And the best teams do that. Some teams get away with it and get a little bit more lucky with those sort of bits and pieces. You haven't really got that lucky, but you've bought your own luck. And look, you've got yourself in a fantastic position with 15 games to go, and that's got to be the headline. You've got yourself in a great place, and you know what you've got to do now, if you know what I mean. You know the level, you know the bar. Teams like, and we'll come on to Oxford in a second, we don't quite know what our level is. We don't quite know where we've got to aim for, because there's not a huge amount of teams really going for that top 6 at the moment. We'll come on to that later. That conversation's a little bit more blurry, and that makes it a little bit more difficult. Whereas for Pompey, you're top of the table, you're in good form, you know what you've got to do, you know that what's in your hand, isn't it? They're chasing you, you're not chasing them, and that makes it a little bit more not comfortable, but it gives you that cushion, but that also ability to really push on and kick on and understand that you've got some really important games coming up that you've got to take on, but you've also got the proof that you can do that. I think that's probably fair.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the never say the. Do you remember when at the start of the season when we had those last minute wins against Wickham and Carlisle, and me and you were both saying this Pompey side doesn't know when it's beaten? I feel like we are returning to that kind of character in us and that kind of performance level, which is great, and it's coming at just the right time. And you're right, there's a 15-game stint now. Paddy Lane posted on Instagram about an hour ago, 15 games to go. That's very much the messaging in the dressing room. That's how the players are feeling right now. That's how the management team's feeling. That's how the ownership's feeling as well. It's all this, and of course it's how the supporters are feeling. It's all this one-way traffic, this aligned vision that actually there's not a lot to go now. You're probably, 3/4 of the way there almost? It's not going to take a lot more. Is it a third to go? Right, well, there you go then. So, a third is a lot, and a lot can change in a period of a third, right? So don't take this by any means in the comments, or if you're watching this and thinking, crikey, he's getting a bit carried away, still 15 games to go. I completely get that. You know, a 15-game run can make or break a season. I'm wholeheartedly agreeing on that. But I'm also thinking the way in which this team's conducted itself, the credit that it has in the bank, it is just about getting over the line now. Yeah,
I think we've covered Pompey. We'll come back to Pompey later because there's a few other categories that they'll probably crop up in, and we're going to speak about Derby and Bolton, and naturally they're not the 3-horse race. I think Peterborough are also well and truly in the mix, and a few others, but that conversation's for another time, and I'm sure we'll touch on that later when we speak about those clubs. On Oxford, not quite as plain sailing, not quite as simple. I don't quite know how to describe it. It's been really, really strange.
What about what I said to you on Sunday Live?
Inconsistency is the only consistency. Yeah,
that's
probably.
How you describe it.
It probably is that. Yeah, it is inconsistent. And I said this also on T-Lop as well. I feel as though in the space of even 10 minutes within football matches, we either know we feel we're getting somewhere, and then we suddenly feel as though we're not anywhere near that level or the required level. And it's even more frustrating because we've seen this group of players perform really well. That's even more of a frustration as supporters. The general supporter feeling at the moment is quite low and quite annoyed. It's quite upset that we could have wasted a really good start to the season. And you can go back and say, I literally said this on this series. I said that the biggest thing is don't let us ruin and waste a good start to the season, because we went on an unbelievable start, and I was like, right, if we're going to be inconsistent all season and miss out, I can almost deal with that, but I can't deal with having a great start and then letting it go. And there's a third to the season to go. I think we're looking at it in a completely different way. You know, you want the season to stop right now, and I want the season to go on even longer. I need even more games. I think that's probably the biggest contrast between the two of us. I want us to sort of have a good run, because it's going to take a decent run. And if you look at the league table, it is still very, very tight, and Oxford are well and truly in the mix. And if it wasn't for Stevenage beating Blackpool, which is a fantastic result for them, more on Stevenage later, we'd still be in the top 6 suddenly at the moment. And then suddenly, your perception then does change. However, we're not, and we've now got to deal with a few games in hand teams have got on Tuesday, tomorrow as of recording, and then we've got a massive game away to Blackpool on Saturday. It doesn't get much easier. It's a very, very challenging upcoming few matches, and look, Reading were in good form coming into it. I think Reading are much better than what people think. I think their league position is massively tarnished by the fact they've got a points deduction. Their squad is much better than their league position does show us. We got a point in that game, and I thought in terms of quality, glimpses of quality, we did show it, but we didn't do enough to win that game. 1-1 was fair. I thought they had one shot on target. They scored from an own goal, and we had an XG chance of 0.94 that we scored. Other than that, that was about it. both teams weren't very good on the day. It was a very scrappy game. So, and the reason why I highlight that one is, one, because it's the most recent game, and two, because it probably summed up the season. Glimpses, or not season, Des Buckingham's tenure, if I'm being frank. It's Des Buckingham's time. Good moments, really bad moments, scrappy moments, and then a finish of underwhelmment. So we've got to try and find a way of guiding us out of that. Hopefully it comes this season, but my gut says Des Buckingham's going to need more time, because this squad is good. I think Des Buckingham's sort of struggling to get a few things right. He's struggling to... It looks as though he's all on his own a little bit from a footballing side of it as well. And I've been saying that for a long time. The assistant manager was appointed, but that was an internal appointment. I don't think that's going to be long term. I do feel as though in the summer we're going to see a big rejig in coaching staff. And that was the biggest thing when we take a manager from abroad, and you bring him in and he hasn't got a coaching team with him. That was the biggest risk we took. We're plucking him out of a completely different culture, a completely different environment, and building a coaching staff in the middle of a season when we're in a very good position isn't very easy. It's the risk we took. Has the risk paid off? You can't judge that now. People are saying that Des Buckingham is under pressure. Of course he's under pressure. John Massini is under pressure every single week. Ian Everett's under pressure every single week. Obviously pressure just does enhance based on how well you're doing. I don't think Des Buckingham's in trouble in terms of his job, because he signed a long-term contract. We paid a large compensation fee, and Des Buckingham, look at his age profile, look what he's done. It's a long-term appointment. It's not short-term. He's not going to be judged this season. He's going to be judged next season and beyond, if I'm being totally honest. We know we're getting into a large chat about it, and we'll move on because there's lots of other things we need to talk about. But yeah, this month for Ox has been probably the story of Des Buckingham's tenure. Really, really inconsistent. Glimpses of promise, but a large amount of frustration and doubt going forward. But let's wait and see. That's the beauty of this series. We'll come back in March time, and we could be in the top six and in a completely different place. I think Des Buckingham needs the support. I think the players need that support, and he just needs to find that click. And I don't know how. The best way to describe an Oxford is we need to find that click, and I just don't know how close we are to finding it. That's how I'll leave it. I feel as though I can see it times, and then it goes. I can see it, and then it goes. I just don't quite know how close we are to fully having it. Let's wait and see. Let's talk about some sides that have impressed us this month. Tom, plenty of sides have done well in January, but one stood out. One side remains unbeaten.
Yes, and one side remains unbeaten in the year of 2024, and we're now, a weekend into February. So fantastic for Leyton Orient. I don't quite think the Leyton Orient agenda extends to this series, does it? That's a purely T-Lop-centric thing, isn't it? That We've never been had a Leyton Orient agenda on this series, and I'm delighted we haven't, because they are the informed League One side at the minute, and deservingly so. They've picked up some really remarkable wins already in the year of 2024. They've beaten the top two teams in this division for this season. I mean, and one of them was emphatically at Fratton Park. One of them was, yes, a more narrow 1-0, but I just think that's an absolutely remarkable achievement. And Richie Wellens, his coaching staff, his group of players, I think the reintroduction, and you can tell me more about him because you know a lot more about him than I do, but the reintroduction and the almost feels like a new signing of Dan Adji coming back into the fold and back into the squad from injury, and he's been a real revelation for them, which is great to see. Pompey fans know about Joe Pigott and what he can offer on his day. I just think it's a really remarkable start to the calendar year for Leyton Orient and their fans and their players and everyone associated with that football club after what was a difficult end to 2023. Of course, we'll be hoping that continues for a long time, Wardy.
13 points from Cambridge, Portsmouth, Bolton, Reading and Carlisle.
Yeah.
Strong, isn't it? It's strong. And Leyton Orient are sort of in this weird place now where we don't quite know where they are in this mini league table. That form is top six form. That is top six form. Have they left it too late? Is that a bunch running away from them? Maybe. I think we'll look at the league table and I'll look at it and remind myself.
They'll never look at it that way, will they, leaving it too late? They'll just look at it as a really, really strong debut season back in League One.
And that's how they should look at it, because that was never the expectation. And Leyton Orient have done a fantastic job of assessing the situation and going, right, this is how we feel we're going to carry on playing. I remember against Charlton, the first game of the season, obviously I didn't look at Leyton Orient before they came into League One too heavily. And I looked at them in that game. They lost that game 1-0 on the opening day, but they dominated Charlton when it comes to ball possession. They gave them a really, really good game. And you saw firsthand, they are an expansive side. They want to play really, really good football. They're not one of the teams like Stevenage have come up and also done a great job where it's slightly more robust, slightly more built an organisation. Leighton Orient want to play a great brand of football. And Richie Wellens has done a great job of taking that from League Two and taking the success of that League Two, changing and altering it in a successful way, and then bringing it into a difficult division and still providing that great success, right? So they're in a place in League One after 29 games, which is phenomenal, in 9th, and they're 10 points off the top 6, which is still quite a few. But I remember, I think there's a part of the season where we were sort of saying, I don't quite know if this is going to go wrong for Leighton Orient playing this way. Are they going to get found out? Is it going to be a little bit of a disaster? It's actually completely been the opposite, and people have got that wrong. I think they've actually been stubborn, but in the right way. They stuck to their principles, and they're now reaping the rewards. And they've beaten some top sides in this division. And one thing's for sure, and I'm sorry if I jinxed you, but I don't think I'm ever going to jinx it at this point in the season. I think Leighton Orient have stayed up, and they've done a great job of staying up in League One this season. And a lot of people thought they were going to do okay. I don't think they were. I didn't put them bottom. I don't know where I put Leighton Orient. I think I might have said they stayed up. Actually, I do like their squad. They did well in the summer, but I didn't put them in the top 10. That was an incredible achievement.
I think also a more broad point on every team bar Carlisle that's come up from League Two has had a fantastic season.
Yeah.
Right. So you look at your Northampton, you look at Leighton Orient that we've just discussed there, and probably the best example is Stevenage, which sort of brings us on nicely to their January, which the run has been against teams that, let's not discredit them too heavily, but they are teams that you'd expect them to beat. That form is undeniable, but you'd expect them to get the wins that they have, and
because of how good they've been. But that's the thing. Stevenage at the start of the season, you sort of go, "What's a tricky run?" That could be really important in, let's say, a survival season. You'd be laughed at now. We're now speaking about a Stevenage side that have got wins again. Got to win games because they're in a top 6 race, which is a huge indictment of how well they've done.
And that it's massive credit to themselves, as you say. It's a really positive indication of where they are, and I think it's one of the biggest compliments I can pay to them, and we can pay to them on this series, is that we're actually holding Stevenage in a real regard that means that we expect them to win these games. Now it's a similar story for me when it comes to Bolton beating those teams you'd expect them to do a number on. It's a slightly different case of Stevenage. Bolton, you're really expecting to be battling at the top end. No real frills or spills either way, other than obviously Leighton Orient win against them, which we mentioned in the reverse of what we're talking about there. That defeat in terms of result, I'm intrigued to see how they get on in some of these bigger games now that they've got to come. They, like ourselves, really, they do have a tough end to the season. One of those games sort of twins itself together, the reverse of the game at Fratton earlier on this season at their place. Barnsley at the weekend, we saw, gave them a little bit of a taster and a test of the metal at the top end of the league. I come back to it, similar boat to Pompey in terms of the exciting January editions as well. Very much could go down to the wire this, and you're talking about a 3, maybe 4 horse race. I can't wait to see how these top 4 teams trade off against each other, because I think it makes for a really exciting climax.
We're going to talk about the more negative section next, and it's the underwhelming boys, the sides that have underwhelmed us this month, and a little bit of manager
Never the
chat
best
too.
bit. Never it's the not, best
and
bit.
We've got manager chat. We've got some new appointments this time as well. And
we have news. We have breaking news, don't we?
Some breaking news around a sacking. I know you don't like speaking about the new appointment in League One. You don't like where he's previously been as a coach. Charlton manager, Tom. I'll give you a hint on that front. The new Charlton manager. But I want to discuss Charlton briefly, and we will talk about it in this section because it hasn't been a great month, and we'll have a little conversation about maybe what Nathan Jones has got to do to keep this Charlton side in League One for next season, which is a very, very weird conversation to have, and not one that we thought we'd be having in February. But that's League One, and that's how things can happen, and why it's unpredictable. Carlisle, though, Tom, you've put this down, and I'll do a few bits and pieces on Carlisle. I was quite impressed with the way they were quite aggressive in the window. They brought quite a few players in during January. Of course, this is the first chat we've had on these reflections after a January transfer window, so I thought Carlisle did strengthen. Their squad is stronger. They've got definitely more depth in there, and they've got more options. However, I did say they're going to do that. When Luke Armstrong got signed, I think it was about a month before it opened, I thought, right, that's a sign of a side that are going to be extremely busy. They've got money to spend. They've got new owners. I think half of it was to, of course, build a squad to try and survive. I think the other half is let's build the best possible team to come straight back into League One next season, to be honest. because they brought in a lot of players. Gelling those players could be difficult. A lot of them are permanent as well, which is interesting. They've actually been very, very, like I say, ambitious with players signing long-term contracts on a permanent basis. Not many are loans. I think only 2 of them were loans. So they're clearly building a team for this season, but next and beyond. But you look at their recent form, it's been a really bad January. They haven't won again since then in the first game against in February either. I look at their league position. I look at how far away they are from safety. It's going to take a remarkable last few months to survive.
Yeah, 5 straight league defeats for Carlisle now, 10 points adrift. You're talking about safety. They are the team that's played the most games of any in the current bottom five of this division.
Abbreviate it, Tom. You're going to abbreviate the word bottom.
The bot 5. The T6 and the bot 5. There you go.
The A2 as well for automatic.
The A2. Not to be confused with motorway in not a motorway, main carriageway in the United Kingdom. That might end up on the cutting room floor. It would be really pompey of us to go up there and not show up this weekend, wouldn't it? Our next game at the time of recording is away at Brunton Park. I give them a little bit of credit. They are scoring goals, give them that. They are shipping an awful lot the wrong way as well. Comfortably the most out of form League One side at this moment in time, and nothing tells me it's going to change. You're talking about the additions in January. Let's not forget that they've kind of performed open heart surgery on themselves with the loss of Owen Moxon. I know that he was never really intending to sign that contract, and I remember seeing that Paul Simpson had kind of given him a piece of paper and let Owen Moxon write down the numbers he wants in terms of a contract to keep him at the club. Obviously not words to that extent, but they were probably offered him one of the biggest deals that Carlisle as a club have offered an individual player. And he's obviously turned that down and come to Pompey, and a brief cameo appearance can sort of speak for itself in terms of what we saw of him at the weekend. I'm really excited to see how that boy progresses. Going to be an interesting one, I think, this weekend from going up to his boyhood club after only leaving, maybe 2.5 weeks ago. Looking forward to seeing how that one develops. But yeah, let's jury's out still on Carlisle slightly, given the window. I think this revitalised and renewed ambition from the ownership to try and patch the holes in what is a bit of a sinking ship right now. But I think your argument's really strong that this is maybe a squad to compete at the top end of League 2 next season, rather than a squad competing at the bottom end of League 1 the following campaign. Horrible January for Charlton. You mentioned them there, a club that seems to have such an insanity about them at the minute, and that will lead us nicely on to the manager chat, which I think, Wardy, if you want to be able to monetize this video, I'm going to pass that over to you and let you chat about the incoming new boss at the Valley.
Well, I was trying to think of a way before we hit record how I can make it so that we can have a conversation about Charlton's new manager without mentioning his name and without annoying you too much. If his name wasn't Nathan Jones, I think it would be quite an interesting chat. Look, I think he's got a massive job on his hands. That's the first thing. He's got a huge job, and this could be anyone coming into a football club, a manager that's taken aside from League 2 to sort of the Premier League. He did sort of change hands just before that official promotion took place, but he was a huge part of Luton's rise. He's got an incredible CV in England. He's got a remarkable CV, and wherever he's been, even that short stint in the Premier League, he's got a fantastic record. And I think he will. It's amazing what happens. You're only as good as your last job. People forget Nathan. People think Nathan Jones, because he went to the Premier League, people think Nathan Jones is a failed Premier League manager. He's also one of the most successful EFL managers in recent history. That's another way of looking at it in terms of what he achieved at Luton and where they are now. And I actually found myself watching I think it was a coach's voice on Nathan Jones, and one of the questions was his next job and what he wanted from his next job, and he said about building something. He wanted to build something. He is actually their manager, not head coach, which is really important. T-Lop are going to be doing an extra soon about the head coach, director of football, manager, and other bits and pieces chat in the more details of how the management side of football works. And it's really fascinating that he's got the manager job, not the head coach role. I think that's because Andy Scott is their current director of football. I think he might be being either sacked completely because, 2 appointments, Dean Holden and Michael Appleton, they haven't gone very well. And also he's in charge of all the recruitment in the summer and in January just gone. Of course, jury's out for the recruitment in January, but let's be honest, he's got more things wrong than he has done right in his time at Charlton so far. He definitely has not improved the football club. It might be a case of him moving away from the football side because he has worked on the business side of things before. Maybe let him focus on business because clearly football is not his forte. and maybe you allow Nathan Jones to be that manager. I think Nathan Jones wants to be the manager. I think he wants to be in charge of recruitment. I think he wants to guide Charlton. And I tell you what, that for me is really encouraging on its own. They need somebody to come in and know football and lift it and galvanise that football club from the fans, from the players, and from the staff. I think if you bring Nathan Jones in to be the coach, but you've still got people that have been there during the quite terrible time before, similar to a way, and this is a bit of a reach, it reminds me of what Manchester United need to do in the Premier League. They've got so much upstairs going wrong. They need somebody to ultimately be in charge of a structure. And that structure at the moment at Charlton is still being found out with the new owners and the new board that have come in. They need somebody to strip what's there and start fresh. Difficult when you're starting fresh in February when you're in a turgid run and definitely in a relegation battle just by staring at the lead position, of course. But you need someone that's going to come in and I guess I'm going to use the word galvanise. You've got to find that connection between the fans again because there's such a disconnect. And in terms of managers that can do that, Michael Appleton was not that, and he hasn't been that at any football club really. His galvanisation comes through performances and results, not through lifting and not through words, essentially. Whereas now Nathan Jones is somebody that can galvanise a fan base. Tom, if his name was, let's say, John Smith, and he had that CV, but he never went to Southampton, do you think that's a good appointment?
You're saying he's had this illustrious EFL career, and I agree with Luton. He then did quite hilariously relegate a football club in the most emphatic of circumstances, which I found ridiculously funny. They weren't in a great position when he walked in, though. They still relegated them, didn't he? So that goes down on the CV. So I think that's a blemish. But I think from take the human aspect out of it, and he's one of the blokes I despise the most on planet Earth. But I think it is a really strong appointment. You look at the pedigree, that it's almost a little bit like why on earth's he taken the job is in my mind. I don't know about you. It's kind of, that's a real poison chalice, isn't it, that place? So why would you want to go in there? And maybe this harks back to what you've seen on the coach's voice, is that he views this as a kind of a little bit of a long-term project for him. That the manager thing's important as well. It's the autonomy, isn't it, of that position. It's the overall control that this appointment has seemed to invoke on himself, and this will be his baby, won't it? This will be his thing to put right. And let's see if he can do it.
It's definitely long-term, because that football club needs long-term open heart surgery. First and foremost, stay up.
3 points off the drop.
Up. And we said on T-Up the other day, that squad should be staying up, but we had that same thing with Oxford. I think, by the way, this Charlton squad's stronger than Oxford's squad last season. But I said, until you're in that moment, you do start changing your opinion on players, and we're external to it, and we don't watch them every single week. I watched them against Derby, and their shot of confidence. The biggest thing is confidence. Football is driven by confidence, and this Charlton side have none of it. They have got a terrible run. They haven't won a game in 2024. They are in a dreadful place. I think Josh said in his video, 68 days since they last won a game. It's terrible. So you can have all of the players, you can recruit all of these players that have played in the Football League and done a great job in the Football League. But if you're playing in a side that have no real identity, no leadership, and you look to the dugout and you've got nobody there, and obviously you're in a terrible run of form, things will only get worse. So huge job in his hands. Managers that have left over January, there wasn't many, but one has, and it wasn't actually in January, but we've got to talk about it because it was officially announced tonight, the 5th of February. But I think the performances over January have helped, or not so helped Andy Crosby, but definitely made this decision much easier. Andy Crosby, sacked from Port Vale, Tom.
Yeah, it's a casualty that's a bit of a byproduct of both a poor run of games and a really poor window, in my opinion. The only real glimmer was kind of the Dan Gore edition and a couple besides that, but I don't think they're as strong as they could have been, Port Vale. The timing to me shows that the club weren't willing to back him, but I also think the timing's really ludicrous from a fan's point of view. You must be, and I'm sure there's Port Vale fans watching, you would be sat there, and I would be if I was a Port Vale fan. I'm sure you feel the same, board. He's like, why on earth have you left it till the end of January to sack the manager? Why, if you were going to pull the trigger, why has that not happened at the start of January? And then you could get some fresh ideas in, do a Colchester, for example, get Danny and Nicky in, have a bit of autonomy over the recruitment in the window, and then kick on and try and salvage a bit from the season. Why pull the trigger at the tail end of February? Tail end of January, start of February. That screams a rash, clutching at straws kind of decision. They've spotted a slump in form. There's probably a little bit more reasoning behind it in the boardroom itself. But yeah, that doesn't scream to me of any kind of methodical approach to dispensing of a manager. I don't know how you see it.
I think it was on another podcast that we said, I think it might have been a famous football manager. I want to say Sir Alex, that said, if you're going to make a big decision, do it early. And I feel as though when you're sacking a manager, you always have to be reactive. You don't proactively sack a manager. That would be stupid. But you have to be reactive when you're sacking a manager. However, you can time how reactive or how close you can be to being reactive, if you know what I mean. And I think Port Vale have gone late on this. And like you say, the timing is really bizarre, because if you're going to do it, I guess it's more difficult. They probably didn't want to do it in the middle of January, because that would have disrupted things even more. Because I think recruiting players to a football club without a manager is extremely difficult, because then you've got to convince a football club why they've got to send a player there on loan, for example. I don't think Dan Gore is going to go on loan to Port Vale in League One. By the way, how they picked up that addition is ridiculous. He should not be at Port Vale. No disrespect to Port Vale. He should be at the top end of League One, maybe even the Championship. Fair play to Port Vale, they pulled it off. Man United definitely would not have sent him to Port Vale if they didn't have a manager. So they might have said, it might have been a case of, let's keep him until the end of January. So there is a bit of stability there. You've got somebody who is actually officially in charge. And then, they probably expected to not get battered 3-0 by Fleetwood. That was a huge, look how bad Fleetwood have been. That's a huge issue. And then obviously and the manner of that performance probably is the reason why he's been sacked. I think if you go and beat Fleetwood after that January, you look at it very differently. You've got a manager in place over January, and then you've put in a horrendous performance. The reasoning behind the sacking, I think, is now evidently clear. Could you have gone and done that earlier when you lost to Carlisle a few weeks ago? That probably is a big indictment. That, by the way, that was not in the league, because that couldn't have been in the league. It was in the league. He got beaten by Carlisle a few weeks ago. Wow. I thought the Carlisle, I didn't realise how long Carlisle have been without winning a game. Maybe it wasn't as long as I thought. But yeah, I mean, there you go. That just shows how bad they've been at Port Vale, and that decision had to be made. Who they go with next, I don't know. Andy Crosby wasn't exactly an inspiring option when Darryl Clark got sacked. But let's be honest, you look at that league table, they looked okay at the early stages. Remember when they beat us, the Kassam, and we thought Port Vale could be a really outsider shout for a top 10, top 6 conversation. Well, that's ridiculous to say now.
Jump in with one more thing just quickly, because I know we want to get on to surprise package and player. The one thing that I noticed about Andy Crosby post-match after our game is his kind of admission of the fact that they sat in, tried to soak up the pressure and hang on for as long as they could. That's against it, and this is very self-indulgent of me to say, but it's against the top side at home, who are going to come and try and play their football and going to want to score a couple. Yes, Port Vale fans will turn around and say to me, well, it took a dubious penalty that Pompey fans will say was, Port Vale fans will say wasn't, or the build-up or whatever. It did take a key moment for that to go in our favour. Their football was dreadful that day. I have to say, I hardly saw them knock it around in any real meaningful passage of possession or any kind of style of play. And for him to come out as a manager and say after the game, well, we tried to sit in and stop them as best we could, and we tried to hang on. That's not the attitude to adopt against the top side at home in League One. That's not going to keep you up. And I wonder whether that is a factor in the dispensing of the manager. So that's all I would add. But surprise package time, everybody! Get your smiles at the ready.
And Tom, I'll let you lead on this front. You've put a team down that, well, I've just recently seen them play. They didn't massively blow me away in terms of performance, but look what they're going through. Look where they are. They picked up some really good results and some really important ones too, Reading.
Yeah, Reading's already been mentioned on tonight's episode. You mentioned it at the top, as you said. I think it's a really strong uptick in form. I believe we touched on it a couple of reflections ago, and maybe even on our previous reflection. But they highlighted January being that fully deserving, I think, of that 1-0 win over Derby at the Medeski. Difficult to say. I'm sure this will come out after the games tomorrow night, but Reading could really start punching towards survival, and many valuable assets remain at the club following the end of the window. I'm thinking Aziz, Sam Smith, Harvey Nibbs, all those players that even the Lewis Wings of this world that they brought in over the summer. I know, not all of those names I mentioned there did come in over the summer transfer window, but the manner in which they've managed to hold on to those assets, we were worried at one point, I think, privately, that Reading were going to be completely stripped of a playing squad. I don't like the Don't like the decision from the EFL following the storming of the pitch. Obviously, the ownership issue remains and is a prominent front-factoring facet of the football club right now. I'm going to keep my personal views on it as a Pompey out of this discussion, but all I would say is the decision from the EFL to enforce a suspended 3-point deduction says absolutely everything about the way that the governing body of English football in the bottom 3 tiers of the professional game is run, right? Why on earth are you then making it a worse state of affairs for a fan base that's trying to save their club? That should not have happened in my book. Yes, they don't want them stalling the pitch. Yes, they don't want the disruption of the games. Yes, it's not the done thing to do. But at the minute, those Reading fans feel hopeless, and that's the kind of measures they're taking. So that would be something I'd add into the conversation. But on the pitch, well, I don't know, the fans have been on the pitch as well, but in terms of the football that's being played, you cannot deny it's been a proper turnaround from another manager that I have a rather distaste for, but it has been a turnaround nonetheless. And you know what, Jack? They might just get themselves out of it.
Well, you look at the teams below that, but below them with them.
And you look at your Charltons and Port Vales as well.
And, and teams above them, like you say, they're in the best form out of all of them. So it's about giving yourself a fighting chance. And look, there's teams down there that shouldn't be down there and will be thinking, how on earth are we down there? Reading, I don't think they're too surprised after what's been thrown at them. They're not massively surprised about their league position, but they're still in with a shout. And Reading could easily, after what's gone on, fallen on their backside and gone, yeah, this season's not our season. And look, we've been massively, they might feel they've been massively hard done by. You've, I think, insinuated it there. They haven't been supported very well. They've got awful ownership issues. They could have just gone, this is not our season. And the fans, they're not going to be focused on the players, really, are they? They're not going to be worried about individual performances and performances from their team. They just want their football club to have a long-term future. But the players have given themselves a huge chance. And if Reading do stay up, that could be one of the biggest achievements of this season, because up there with Cheltenham, really, two sides that are probably the biggest, the highest chances of any of those four coming out. They've got a massive opportunity to do so. I mean, Cheltenham's recent form hasn't been great, and I do worry a little bit about Cheltenham after their window. I don't think it was quite as good as maybe people would think. They have lost 3 on the bounce now and lost 4 of their last 5, but they definitely have improved, and it couldn't have gone much worse after the first 10 games. But Reading, who's just above them, like you say, they're in a really, really interesting place where they could easily have given up, but they haven't. And the supporters should be very proud of the players, because we've heard some rumours about how they're being treated just as individuals and employees of that football club. It's terrible. And they're grinding out results, and they're finding ways to get results. On surprise package, there's a few more mentions that I was going to put forward. Cambridge have done well, I think, in this month, but also Exeter. Exeter have done extremely well. They're 16th at the moment. They had a really strong January, both in recruitment and on the pitch. They did a fantastic job of now being 16th in League One after last time they were floating, I think only just staying out of that bottom 4 through goal difference. They're beating Wigan, but got a point against Portsmouth, beating Carlisle, point against Cambridge, beating both Barnsley and Bristol Rovers. And the Barnsley game was away from home too. Really impressed with Exeter. And look, we think we had this chat again on this series, and we spoke, this beauty of this series is looking back on how things have changed. We spoke about Gary Colburn. They released that statement saying we're not going to sack him, we're going to back him in January. And we had a chat. We said
we laughed at that, didn't we?
We laughed at that, and we went, what on earth are you talking about? Sometimes you've got to be ruthless, right? And I think you've got to make a decision that maybe isn't the most attractive. Sacking a manager is probably the least attractive thing you can do when you're running a football club. You want to keep hold of your manager for as long as you can and hope they can be successful in the perfect world. And Exeter was sort of living in maybe the hope that he was going to turn it round, and we were sort of going, right, what's the evidence that he can? Well, there you go. We're not always right. We're not gospel, because Exeter have done an extremely good job of turning it around in January. And like I said, I've been really impressed with the players they've brought in and the squad they're building, but also the improvement on the football pitch is just as impressive. And I'm really glad for Exeter because, like I said, I've got a little soft spot for Exeter, and I'm glad that I've got a happy flatmate that's a thumbnail designer that's in a good place. Harris, if you watch him.
Anyway, moving on. Player of the month.
Player of the month next, and a few. I mean, like, should we say it again? This is the hardest segment to do. There is a lot of people, a lot of players.
There are some impressive clubs that haven't been mentioned so far this month, by the way, we should say, on the show so far.
We'll come back to them with the players too as well, because like you say, they've done well. A lot of teams in League One, and it is shaping up a really interesting table and form table too. But let's touch on some players. Tom, you can kick us off. Like you say, we always say don't be too harsh on us because we will miss players. But Tom, how do you want to start?
Well, I mean, yeah, if you're a Stevenage, Blackpool, Bolton, Barnsley, Wigan, Peterborough or Derby fan, you're going to be thinking, oh my word, they haven't spoken about our team very much today, have they? But I think that just kind of shows the nature of a really strong month and loads to get through and plenty of talking points. So there will be plenty of mentions for your clubs on the subsequent episodes. And as you will know, if you're a regular viewer of this series, there have been mentions of your club on this many times in the past. I am being quite selfish and exclusive, and I know I'm contradicting myself by saying, oh, we haven't mentioned your club, and I'm now mentioning my club for the third or fourth time this episode. However, Marlon Pack and Paddy Lane, who I mentioned, both of them at the top of the show, I think they make really strong cases for players of the month individually. I've mentioned him already. I've mentioned him again there. Paddy Lane's contribution to Pompey at the minute is astronomically good. 4 goals and 2 assists in all competitions in the month of January for Eprom Mason Clark. I know that kind of conversations shrouded by the tail end of the January transfer window and where his future lies. 2 goals and 3 assists in all comps for Harrison Burrows as well. It's a strong contribution from the 2 at Peterborough there, and of course an overt lack of mention for them and Derby in this episode. Bit of a random shout, it builds on your Cambridge point a minute ago, but Lyle Taylor, what a fantastic and remarkable difference and impact he has made already, scoring some important goals. He's up to 3 goals in the space of 2 weeks of just having arrived during the window, which is fantastic for him. And I think he'll kick on. And you talk about difference makers. We spoke about the appointment that Cambridge made following the departure of Mark Bonner, and I think that side's just going from strength to strength. And there was a brief period of time, wasn't there, we were worried Cambridge might be sucked into that relegation conversation. That's absolutely something that they've pulled themselves out of really well. Any other Player of the Month nominees from you, sir?
Piergiani at Stevenage has really impressed me at the back. He's been fantastic. He scored against Reading in that game, but he's been a really, really important part of that Stevenage back line. Of course, kept a clean sheet against Blackpool too. Cashin at Derby is always a really, really good shout. Chris Martin for Bristol Rovers too. Really impressed with him at Bristol Rovers. He's scored a really important amount of goals, and I was a little bit harsh on Bristol Rovers in the window, saying that I think they need another striker. Not because I don't rate Chris Martin, I think he's been phenomenal, but more because if he isn't fit, I don't quite know where they turn. They lost Aaron Collins to Bolton, and Bolton, as you mentioned, you had a very good window alongside Portsmouth, but then Aaron Collins was a fantastic example of that. He looks to be another marquee signing that a League One club has pulled off, but where does that leave Bristol Rovers? Probably just with Chris Martin, who has been great, but he isn't blessed in his early years of his career. You don't quite know where he's going to be in the long term. They might be just saying, right, let's use that money sensibly in the summer. Let's look at that money that we've got now and spend it in the summer where we've got a little bit more time to use it effectively. Chris Martin, somebody that we know is scoring goals for us now. Let's make sure we can just keep that going and like you say, reassess it in the summertime. But like you say, there's a lot of mentions in there. Mendes Lang's had a really good month too at Derby County. You look at the top teams, and I said this in the roundup, and you just mentioned it there about not mentioning them. These teams are plodding along very nicely, and to be in that position, you've got to have a team performance. You've got to be a really good unit. And I look at Derby as a unit, and more so of Derby, because Paul Warren's teams are built on organisation and unit. You won't have normally one standout individual. I think Blackett Taylor, for example, and Mendes Lang are those examples of talents that can be that. But you look at that back three, Cash, I know we pointed out, but they've got to be really well organised and understand the way that Paul Warren wants his team to operate. Against Charlton, they weren't great, but they found a way to win. And that's what they want to do. They want to create a unified squad as well as team, and that's why Derby are second. That's why they're in the top two. And Derby, they had a terrible start to the season, and we had conversations on here about Paul Warne and about where he stands as a manager at Derby County, and they're second in the league. That's how things can change. And I always speak about this series being a great example of following the League One journey. And Derby's a really good example of that. They're second in League One. They've got a game in hand on Portsmouth, and suddenly they're 1 point behind them. Bolton have got games in hand on Portsmouth too. They could go above them. Peterborough have got games in hand. Barnsley got games in hand. Stevenage have got 2 games in hand on Oxford, and I think Blackpool have played now the same as Oxford. There's a lot still to play for, but there's some really, really strong outfits. And I think that this time last year when we were doing these, we could have given you a comfortable top 3 of Ipswich, Sheffield Wednesday and Plymouth. I can't give you a top 3 right now. I honestly can't. I won't get into predictions in this video because that's for a later date.
That's to come.
That could be still to come. I can't give you a definitive top 3. I can't give you a definitive top 6 for sure. And that just shows us where we are, Tom. Final points before we round this up. I don't want to go on for days, but that just shows how League One is really, really open. I can't get, you want to put Pompey in that top 2, probably top 3 as well, mainly 2.
No, not Oxford, top 3. That was top 3.
No, but
no thanks.
Oxford, I want to put them in the top 6, and I can't do that at the moment. But that just shows where we are.
Yeah, and I think the luxury from a Pompey point of view is even with the games in hand currently, once everyone's on a level playing field, we are still guaranteed a snug second position in the league. So regardless of what happens with the Bolton games in hand and Peterborough, when you work it out, we are just about still second. But I would agree, it's going to, I said it earlier on in the episode, it is going to go right down to the wire. I'm so excited. And actually, you look at kind of the run of fixtures that Bolton have in the not too distant future, the run of games that we have, the teams that Derby still have to play, the teams that Barnsley still have to play. Nothing's decided right now, and I think that's probably the way we like it as League One fans. And obviously it makes for really interesting viewing towards the tail end, doesn't it? So with February, March, April, 3 roundup, 3 reflections to go. How much is going to change in that period of time? It's very exciting.
We've got the awards as well, Tom. Remember them?
Oh, that was the best one we ever did. So looking forward to that. Yes,
I think the awards was
what a fabulous episode this has been.
Absolutely. Let me know in the comments down below how you reflect on the month. Of course, this is probably going to go out on Wednesday, so we are a week into February. We do apologise for that, but there's been so much going on.
Busy.
We can't help it. There's been so much going on, and I like these videos. They have a little bit of they don't have to be watched in the short term. They've got a little bit of longevity about them. We have some really in-depth conversations. That's the point of them. Tom, thank you so much for coming back on for January, even though I'm looking at the date and it's February. I can't wait to see you in most likely March. That probably is the theme for these reflections.
Always a pleasure, mate. I don't really have much choice at this point, do I? So yes, fabulous. But
next year you might not. Next year you might have a chance, depending on how Pompey season goes.
Who knows? We'll see. Let's not get too excited. 15 games, Wardy. 3rd to go.
Take care.